There comes a moment in life when exhaustion no longer comes from doing too little, but from doing demai, a quiet, almost invisible fatigue born from constantly trying to make things happen, forcing doors, chasing outcomes, pushing against time, as if life was something to be conquered rather than understood. Many people arrive at this moment confused, wondering why effort no longer produces results, why motivation feels hollow, and why even spiritual practices seem to have lost their meaning. This is not failure. It is often a signal that something deeper is asking to be reorganized from the inside out. Most of us were taught, directly or indirectly, that value comes from struggle, that movement equals progress, and that control is synonymous with safety. From an early age, the nervous system learns to associate urgency with survival. Over time, this internal state becomes the default frequency from which decisions are made, relationships are built, and dreams are pursued. Joe Dispenza often explains that when the body is constantly living in the chemistry of stress, it becomes addicted to the familiar emotions of effort, anticipation, and lack. In this state, even the desire for change is driven by the same energy that created stagnation in the first place. What is rarely explained is that alignment is not passivity, and allowing life to organize itself is not resignation. It is a radical internal recalibration. Napoleon Hill wrote that every form of achievement begins with a definite inner state before it ever becomes visible in the world. When inner coherence is absent, action becomes noise. When inner coherence is present, even small movements carry disproportionate power. This video is an invitation to explore that turning point, the moment you stop running after life and begin to meet it from a place of internal order. Not as a technique, not as a promise of instant results, but as a deep shift in relationship with yourself, with time, and with the intelligence that organizes reality far beyond personal effort. The inner disorder behind constant effort. There is a subtle but persistent tension that lives beneath the surface of those who feel compelled to keep moving, even when movement no longer brings clarity. It is not always anxiety in the obvious sense, nor is it panic or fear in its raw form. It is quieter than that. It feels like a low-grade pressure in the chest, a restless anticipation that never quite resolves, a sense that something important is always just ahead, but never fully reached. This inner state becomes so familiar that it is mistaken for motivation, when in truth it is a form of internal disorganization. Much of this disorder begins long before adulthood. The nervous system learns early that approval, safety, and belonging are often conditional. Effort becomes a strategy for connection. Doing more feels like protection against loss. Over time, this pattern solidifies into identity. The person no longer simply takes action, they become someone who must always be in pursuit. When this happens, stillness starts to feel threatening, as if stopping would cause everything to collapse. Yet what collapses in stillness is often only the illusion of control. From a neurobiological perspective, a body conditioned by constant effort operates primarily from survival chemistry. Stress hormones become familiar companions, shaping perception and narrowing attention. Joe Dispenza describes how the brain, when repeatedly exposed to the same emotional states, wires itself to expect similar futures. The body becomes the mind, and the mind projects a reality that matches the internal signal. In this loop, chasing outcomes feels necessary because the present moment is never experienced as sufficient. The future becomes a psychological refuge rather than a natural unfolding. This internal fragmentation creates a paradox. The more one tries to force life into alignment, the more resistance appears. Opportunities feel delayed, relationships feel strained, and intuition becomes difficult to hear beneath mental noise. Carl Jung spoke of this dynamic through the concept of the shadow, not as something dark or immoral, but as the unacknowledged parts of the psyche that seek expression. When effort is used to suppress uncertainty, vulnerability, or emotional fatigue, these aspects retreat into the unconscious, where they influence behavior indirectly. Life then begins to mirror this inner conflict through repeated obstacles and unresolved patterns. What often goes unnoticed is that this state is not caused by external circumstances. It is maintained by an internal posture toward life itself. The body leans forward into time, constantly anticipating what must be fixed, improved, or achieved next. Presence becomes fragmented. Attention is divided between regret and expectation. In such a condition, even moments of success feel brief, quickly replaced by the need for the next validation. The system never fully rests in coherence. Napoleon Hill emphasized that clarity of purpose must be accompanied by emotional alignment, otherwise desire becomes tension rather than direction. When desire is fueled by a sense of lack, it amplifies the very absence it seeks to resolve. This is not a moral failing or a lack of discipline. It is a misunderstanding of how inner states shape outer experience. Effort without coherence drains energy. Coherence without urgency reorganizes perception. There is also a deeper existential layer to this constant striving. Many people sense, often unconsciously, that time is slipping away. The fear is not simply of failure, but of insignificance, of reaching the end of life having moved constantly without ever arriving internally. This fear can masquerade as ambition, productivity, or even spiritual dedication, yet beneath it lies a quiet grief for a sense of wholeness that was postponed in favor of becoming someone else. In moments of stillness, this grief sometimes surfaces. It can feel uncomfortable, even disorienting. The mind searches for tasks to avoid feeling it, but this discomfort is not an enemy. It is a signal of reintegration. Jung believed that transformation does not occur through repression, but through conscious relationship with what has been avoided. When effort pauses, awareness expands. When awareness expands, life gains room to reorganize itself. The idea of allowing life to organize itself often triggers resistance because it is misunderstood as passivity. In reality, it is a shift from reactive motion to responsive presence. It is the difference between pushing a river upstream and learning its currents. When the internal environment becomes more ordered, decisions require less force. Actions arise from clarity rather than urgency. Timing becomes intuitive rather than strategic. This reorganization does not happen all at once. It begins subtly, often with a growing intolerance for unnecessary struggle. Situations that once felt normal start to feel heavy. The body signals exhaustion not as weakness, but as wisdom. The psyche asks for a different way of relating to effort, success, and meaning. This is not the end of ambition, but its maturation. When inner order begins to replace inner pressure, something remarkable occurs. Life responds differently, not because reality has changed, but because perception has. Opportunities that were invisible become noticeable. Relationships feel less transactional and more resonant. The future no longer feels like a problem to be solved, but a landscape unfolding in response to internal coherence. This chapter is not about abandoning effort, but about understanding its proper place. Effort rooted in fear contracts life. Effort emerging from alignment amplifies it. The difference is not visible at first glance, but it is felt deeply in the nervous system, in the quality of attention, and in the quiet confidence that arises when one no longer needs to chase what is already moving toward them. When control becomes the quiet source of resistance, control often disguises itself as responsibility. It speaks with the voice of logic, planning, and anticipation, convincing the mind that vigilance is maturity and that relaxation is a risk. For many, control feels like the only reliable way to prevent disappointment, loss, or chaos. Yet beneath this posture lies a subtle contraction, an internal tightening that slowly distances the individual from the natural intelligence of life. What begins as a protective mechanism gradually becomes a barrier to coherence. The need for control is rarely born from confidence. It emerges from uncertainty that was never given space to be felt. When earlier experiences taught the nervous system that unpredictability leads to pain, the psyche learned to manage outcomes preemptively. Over time, this management becomes chronic. The mind rehearses conversations before they happen, predicts problems before they arise, and prepares emotionally for futures that may never arrive. Life is no longer lived directly. It is managed from a distance. From a physiological standpoint, control maintains the body in a heightened state of alert. Muscles remain subtly tense, breathing becomes shallow, and attention narrows. Joe Dispenza describes how this state keeps the brain locked into familiar neural circuits, recycling the past into the future. When the body is constantly signaling danger, even in subtle ways, the mind interprets neutrality as threat. Calm becomes unfamiliar. Stillness feels unsafe. In this condition, Surrender is misunderstood as loss rather than relief. This internal environment creates resistance not because the universe withholds support, but because perception becomes rigid. Control demands predictability, yet life unfolds through complexity, timing and interaction far beyond conscious calculation. When the mind insists on specific outcomes, it filters reality through expectation. Anything that does not match the internal script is experienced as failure, delay, or misalignment. The individual feels at odds with life, unaware that the conflict originates within. Carl Jung approached this dynamic through the concept of individuation, the process by which a person becomes whole, by integrating conscious intention with unconscious wisdom. Control interrupts this dialogue. It prioritizes conscious will while dismissing intuition, synchronicity, and symbolic guidance. The psyche responds by expressing tension through recurring patterns, emotional fatigue, or a sense of being stuck despite constant effort. These are not punishments. They are signals of imbalance. There is a particular exhaustion that accompanies prolonged control. It is not relieved by rest alone because its source is not physical. It comes from maintaining an identity that must always know, decide, and anticipate. This identity becomes heavy over time. The person may achieve external stability while feeling internally fragmented. Success, when it comes, feels strangely empty, quickly replaced by the next problem to manage. Satisfaction remains fleeting because presence was never fully engaged. Napoleon Hill emphasized the importance of faith, not as belief without evidence, but as an inner state that precedes manifestation. Faith, in this sense, is incompatible with excessive control. Where faith trusts unseen processes, control demands immediate proof. Where faith allows timing to unfold, control accelerates, often prematurely. This acceleration fractures rhythm. Actions lose resonance. Life responds with friction, not because effort is wrong, but because it is misaligned with timing. Control also distorts the relationship with desire. What is wanted becomes entangled with fear of not having it. The emotional charge around goals intensifies, creating attachment rather than inspiration. The nervous system interprets desire as survival, and survival does not wait patiently. It rushes. In rushing, subtle signals are missed. Opportunities that require receptivity rather than pursuit go unnoticed. The person moves faster, yet arrives less often. There is an irony in this pattern. The more one tries to secure certainty, the more uncertain life feels. This is because certainty does not come from external arrangement, but from internal coherence. When inner states are stable, external fluctuations lose their power to destabilize. When inner states are reactive, even favorable circumstances generate anxiety about their loss. Control attempts to manage this anxiety externally, but anxiety originates internally. Allowing life to organize itself begins not with relinquishing action, but with softening internal rigidity. This softening creates space for perception to widen. When perception widens, context appears. Events are no longer isolated obstacles, but part of a larger movement. Timing reveals itself not through force, but through sensitivity. The individual begins to sense when to move and when to wait, not as rules, but as felt understanding. This shift often feels unfamiliar at first. Without constant mental engagement, there can be a sense of emptiness, as if something essential is missing. That missing element is often the familiar tension that once defined identity. As it dissolves, a quieter sense of self begins to emerge. This self does not need to prove its worth through control. It trusts its capacity to respond rather than predict. Life responds differently to this posture. Interactions become less strained. Decisions require less justification. Outcomes feel less personal and more contextual. Even challenges carry less emotional weight because they are no longer interpreted as threats to identity. The individual is not passive, but present, not disengaged, but attuned. Control loosens not through force, but through understanding its cost. When the psyche recognizes that constant management does not create safety, it becomes open to a different relationship with uncertainty. In that openness, resistance fades. Life does not need to be organized by force when internal order is restored. It organizes itself through resonance, timing, and coherence that emerge naturally when control is no longer mistaken for care. The power of surrender and the mistake of forcing manifestation. In the quest for manifestation and personal growth, there is a subtle yet critical mistake that many people unknowingly make: the mistake of forcing things to happen. We are often taught that success requires constant effort, determination, and a relentless pursuit of our goals. However, there is an alternative path to manifestation, one that is grounded in surrender, trust, and alignment. The act of forcing, in many cases, is the very thing that prevents the flow of manifestation from reaching us. The concept of surrender in the context of manifestation might seem counterintuitive. We live in a world that glorifies action and achievement, where we are encouraged to go after what we want with all our might. The idea of surrendering seems, at first glance, like giving up. It might feel like we are passively waiting for something to happen, rather than actively making it happen. But the truth is that surrender is not about passivity or inaction. It is about aligning ourselves with the natural flow of the universe and allowing the universe to unfold in its own time. Joe Dispenza, in his exploration of the mind and its influence on reality, discusses the importance of coherence between our thoughts, emotions, and actions. When we try to force something into existence, we are often acting from a place of resistance and imbalance. Our emotions are not aligned with our desires, and our thoughts are consumed with the need for control. This creates a dissonance or a misalignment that prevents us from achieving the harmony required for manifestation. When we surrender, we are not giving up on our dreams or desires. Rather, we are releasing the need to control every aspect of how those desires will manifest. In a sense, we are trusting that the universe, or the higher force at play, knows the best path for us. It is important to note that surrender is not about giving up on our desires altogether. It is about releasing the tight grip we have on the how and allowing ourselves to be guided by intuition and divine timing. Napoleon Hill, in his book Think and Grow Rich, addresses the importance of definiteness of purpose, but also speaks to the necessity of persistence in the face of adversity. However, Hill also stresses the importance of maintaining an open mind and a willingness to trust the process. He notes that many people fail not because they lack the desire or will, but because they are too attached to a rigid idea of how success should unfold. This attachment often leads to frustration, and as a result, they inadvertently block the very opportunities they seek. One of the reasons why forcing can be so detrimental to manifestation is because it arises from a state of fear and lack. When we are afraid that our desires won't come true, we tend to take extreme measures to make them happen. We put pressure on ourselves, thinking that we must work harder or manipulate circumstances to get what we want. This sense of urgency can create anxiety, which in turn lowers our vibrational frequency. When we are anxious or desperate, we are not operating from a place of alignment, but from a place of resistance. Carl Jung, the renowned psychiatrist, speaks about the importance of integrating the unconscious mind to achieve wholeness and balance. When we are forcing outcomes, we are often disconnected from our deeper self, the part of us that knows what is truly best. By surrendering, we allow our unconscious to guide us toward what we truly need, rather than what we think we need in the moment. This deep inner alignment creates the conditions necessary for authentic manifestation to occur. Surrendering, however, is not a passive act of doing nothing. It requires a deep commitment to self-trust and to the trust in the process of life. It involves stepping out of the cycle of control and manipulation and stepping into a state of grace and flow. The universe, or whatever higher power you believe in, is always in motion, and it works in ways that we cannot always see or understand in the moment. When we surrender, we stop trying to force our desired outcomes and instead focus on maintaining the clarity of our vision and purpose. We trust that everything is unfolding as it should. To surrender effectively, one must cultivate patience. The impatience we often feel comes from a deep-seated fear, the fear that if we don't act quickly, we will miss out on opportunities or fail to manifest our desires. However, as we begin to trust the process, we find that the timing of the universe is always perfect. The right opportunities will come at the right time, and often they arrive in ways we never expected. The key to mastering surrender is letting go of the need for external validation and approval. So often we look for reassurance from others or from external circumstances to know if we are on the right path. But true surrender requires us to turn inward and trust ourselves. We must let go of the fear of what others think, or how things might appear, and focus solely on our inner alignment with the greater whole. One way to practice surrender is through meditation and mindfulness. These practices allow us to quiet the mind and connect with our inner wisdom. By cultivating a deep sense of presence and stillness, we can release the anxiety that comes from forcing and simply allow ourselves to be guided. Joe Dispenza's work emphasizes the importance of meditation in this process, noting that it allows us to break free from the habitual patterns of thought and emotion that keep us stuck in cycles of resistance. Ultimately, surrender is about coming to terms with the fact that we cannot control everything. Life, in its essence, is unpredictable, and the more we try to control it, the more we push away the very things we seek. By releasing the need to control and allowing the universe to unfold naturally, we open ourselves to the abundance and opportunities that are waiting for us. The universe has a way of supporting us when we stop fighting it. The mistake of forcing manifestation stems from a lack of trust. Trust in ourselves, trust in the process, and trust in the universe. When we surrender, we align ourselves with the natural flow of life, opening ourselves up to the magic of manifestation. Rather than forcing our desires into existence, we allow them to unfold in their own perfect time, trusting that the universe is guiding us toward what is best. Through patience, presence, and trust, we can truly manifest the life we desire. Surrender, in this sense, is not about passivity, but about a profound active choice to release resistance and allow life to move through us. Inner alignment. As a living state, not a momentary insight, there is a quiet misunderstanding that often accompanies spiritual insight. Many believe alignment is something that happens in rare moments of clarity during a retreat, a meditation, or a powerful realization, and that once experienced, it should remain effortlessly present. When life inevitably returns with its demands, noise, and unpredictability, this expectation collapses, giving rise to frustration and self-doubt. Alignment, however, was never meant to be a peak experience. It is a living state, shaped and reshaped by relationship with the inner world. Inner alignment is not sustained by intensity, but by coherence. It is less about how elevated one feels and more about how integrated one becomes. Joe Dispenza often emphasizes that transformation occurs when the brain and heart begin to operate in synchrony, creating a stable internal environment that is no longer dependent on external validation. This state is not dramatic. It is subtle, grounded, and often unnoticed at first. Its power lies in consistency, not spectacle. When alignment is misunderstood as a feeling to be chased, it becomes another form of striving. The individual begins to measure their spiritual state, comparing today to yesterday, searching for signs of progress or regression. This measurement recreates the same internal pressure that once governed material pursuits. The nervous system once again leans forward into time, attempting to secure a future state rather than inhabit the present one. Alignment dissolves not because it was lost, but because it was turned into a goal instead of a foundation. Carl Jung viewed psychological integration as a lifelong dialogue between conscious awareness and unconscious material. In this sense, alignment is not static. It evolves as new layers of the psyche emerge. Each phase of life reveals different aspects of fear, desire, grief, and meaning. Inner order is not achieved by eliminating these experiences, but by relating to them without fragmentation. When emotions are allowed to move without suppression or dramatization, the psyche remains whole. Wholeness is alignment in motion. A coherent inner state changes how life is interpreted. Events are no longer immediately labeled as obstacles or rewards. They are seen as information. This shift reduces emotional reactivity and restores a sense of agency that does not rely on control. When something unexpected occurs, the internal system does not collapse into urgency. It reorganizes. This capacity to reorganize internally is what allows life to appear cooperative rather than antagonistic. Napoleon Hill wrote about definiteness of purpose as a stabilizing force. Yet purpose, when disconnected from inner coherence, becomes rigid. True purpose adapts without losing direction. It is felt rather than enforced. When alignment is present, purpose does not require constant reaffirmation. It expresses itself naturally through choices, boundaries, and priorities that feel obvious rather than forced. There is a particular calm that emerges when alignment becomes embodied rather than conceptual. Decisions feel cleaner. Less justification is required. The mind no longer argues endlessly with itself because internal values are no longer in conflict. This does not eliminate doubt, but it prevents doubt from becoming paralyzing. Doubt passes through awareness rather than anchoring identity. Inner alignment also transforms the experience of time. Urgency softens. Patience is no longer an effortful virtue, but a byproduct of trust. When the internal environment is stable, waiting does not feel like stagnation. It feels like gestation. Much like nature, where growth occurs invisibly before becoming visible, inner processes unfold beneath the surface long before external change appears. Those who remain aligned during this invisible phase often find that life shifts suddenly, though the groundwork was laid quietly over time. One of the most profound effects of sustained alignment is the restoration of intuitive perception. Intuition is not mystical. It is the nervous system's capacity to integrate vast amounts of information without conscious analysis. When internal noise decreases, this capacity strengthens. Choices feel guided rather than calculated. The individual senses when to move, when to pause, and when to release without needing a rational explanation. This sensitivity is lost in states of chronic effort and recovered in states of coherence. Alignment also reshapes relationships. Interactions become less transactional and more authentic. The need to prove, persuade, or protect diminishes. Boundaries arise naturally without defensiveness. The individual is less reactive to others' emotional states because their own internal state is no longer dependent on external harmony. This often leads to a quiet reorganization of social dynamics, where some connections deepen while others gently dissolve. Importantly, alignment does not shield one from difficulty. Challenges still arise. Loss, uncertainty, and change remain part of the human experience. What changes is the internal response. Difficulty is no longer interpreted as a sign of misalignment, but as part of the ongoing dialogue between inner order and external reality. This perspective prevents the collapse into self-blame that often accompanies spiritual misunderstanding. As alignment stabilizes, effort finds its proper place. Action becomes an extension of clarity rather than a compensation for fear. Work feels less draining because it is no longer fueled by internal conflict. Rest becomes restorative rather than guilt-inducing. Even ambition changes texture. It becomes expressive rather than compensatory, driven by curiosity instead of lack. Inner alignment, lived as a state rather than an achievement, allows life to organize itself without force, not because effort disappears, but because effort is no longer fighting against the current of the psyche. In this state, life does not feel like something to outrun or conquer. It feels like a conversation, responsive and intelligent, unfolding in rhythm with an inner world that has learned how to listen. When life no longer needs to be chased, there is a quiet relief that arrives when the inner struggle softens, not because all answers have appeared, but because the urgency to force them dissolves. What once felt like a race begins to feel like a rhythm. The need to prove, to accelerate, to anticipate every outcome slowly loses its grip, revealing something more stable beneath it. Alignment does not announce itself loudly. It settles in the nervous system, in the breath, in the way attention returns to the present moment without resistance. When inner order replaces inner pressure, life responds differently. Not because the world suddenly becomes easier, but because perception becomes clearer. Challenges are no longer interpreted as signs of failure or delay, but as movements within a larger process. Success no longer carries the anxiety of loss, and waiting no longer feels like stagnation. What emerges is a sense of cooperation with time, rather than conflict with it. Joe Dispenza often reminds us that transformation is not about becoming someone new, but about releasing the emotional states that no longer serve who we already are. In this release, the body exits survival and enters coherence. The mind stops rehearsing the past and controlling the future. Presence becomes sufficient. From this place, action regains its power, not because it is forced, but because it is aligned. Napoleon Hill wrote that faith is a state of mind that can be cultivated. Faith in this sense is not belief without evidence, but trust born from internal stability. When alignment is lived rather than sought, life organizes itself not as a reward, but as a reflection. The chase ends, not because desire disappears, but because desire no longer comes from lack. This is the quiet transformation few speak about. Not dramatic, not instant, but deeply real. A life no longer pursued but participated in. Now pause for a moment and consider this question. If you stopped running after outcomes and allowed your inner world to become coherent, what kind of life might begin to move toward you naturally? If this reflection resonated with you, subscribe to the channel so you can continue exploring this deeper relationship with yourself and with life. Stay with us on the final screen and continue watching the next video, where this journey of alignment unfolds even further.